Why is this different from rapture? According to the pre-wrath model, let's take a look. The second coming, on the other hand, refers to Christ's physical return to earth to defeat his enemies and establish his millennial kingdom. There are a number of differences between these two events, and I'm not showing you those differences right now on this particular slide or in this particular show. Maybe in post-production. Well, let me see if I've got one of those slides on my chart here. Parallels, Great Tribulation, Day of the Lord. I didn't bring it in here. I suppose if I want to, I could go over here and show you maybe one of the timelines that I have might show. Give me a second. Maybe I do want to show a little bit of this to you. Just looking for it real quick. It'll pop out to me as soon as I see it. That could work, but I think I can get a little... Okay, this kind of works. This is kind of what I'm looking at. This is a classic pre-trib chart showing the differences between the rapture and the second coming. This isn't... I don't agree completely with everything on this chart. I have some questions about one or two of them, but most of it, I think, captures the essence of what I'm trying to explain. Let me make that full screen. Most of it captures the essence of what I'm trying to explain in my understanding of the way these two events are different. And they're different enough, I believe, that, or they're described in detail enough in the Bible that I believe that we can notice the differences. In other words, I don't understand how post-tribbers can honestly look at all of these details and walk away with the understanding that they're conflated, that they're the same event. And so I'm just parking them on the screen long enough for you to kind of chew on some of the details without me actually reading all of them. But for instance, where it says imminent as far as rapture, I don't believe in the classic view of imminency. I believe in intra-tribulational imminency. So imminency within a tribulation. I don't believe that the rapture affects believers only, per se. I mean, only believers are raptured, yes. But classic pre-tribbers will say something to the effect that it's a secret rapture, meaning only believers are going to see it. I don't agree with that. I think everyone on earth is going to see what happens when the rapture takes place. Is it before the day of wrath? Yes. There's no reference to Satan? Yep, we don't see that. Jesus comes in the air? Yeah, that's true. He comes for his bride? Yeah, that works too. But on the other side where it says he comes with his bride, that's debatable. For second coming, I'm not sure. You guys see where I'm talking about? Oops. It's this one right there, that short one. Didn't need to do that. Anyway, and then the only the saints see him. Yeah, I disagree with that one. Every eye is going to see him, as far as I understand. The tribulation begins. I disagree with that statement down at the very bottom where it says the tribulation begins. Instead, the rapture initiates the day of the Lord. So there's where we have equivocation on the word tribulation versus wrath. So some of this, I believe, I can work with. So going back to my own slide, the second coming, on the other hand, refers to Christ's physical return to earth to defeat his enemies and establish his millennial kingdom. That's the bigger picture that I'm going to just focus on for now, that I agree with. This event occurs after the outpouring of God's wrath, during the day of the Lord, right? Read Revelation 19:11 through 16, as well as Zechariah 14:4. This event is talking about the second coming. It occurs after the outpouring of God's wrath, meaning there are events that are prophesied to happen during the day of the Lord, of which the second coming event in Revelation 19, where Jesus returns on a white horse with heaven's armies in tow to do battle with the Antichrist. This marks the ending of the day of the Lord, particularly because it marks the end of the Antichrist, which is one of the primary purposes of the day of the Lord, which is to pour out judgment on the Antichrist himself, to pour out judgment on Satan. And so the Antichrist and the false prophet, if we already know from reading Revelation 19, they get destroyed. They get tossed into the lake of fire. And so if we go over to, say, Revelation, drop down to chapter 19, and scroll down to verse 19, we see, "And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse, against his army." So this is John recording the events that are labeled by what a Bible student says the Battle of Armageddon. But notice what happens, what John records in verse 20 and 21. "The beast was seized, with him the false prophet who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast, and those who worked his image, those who were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone. The rest were killed with the sword, which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh." So this event marks this event occurs after the outpouring of God's wrath. It is the culminating event of the outpouring of God's wrath. It's the zenith. It's the finality, right? The end of the day of the Lord, basically. The second coming is marked by Christ's visible return in power and glory, where he sets foot on the earth, unlike the rapture where believers meet him in the air, and he doesn't seem to touch ground on earth. That's another thing that makes it different, in our opinion, from the rapture. Pre-wrath proponents like Robert Van Kampen and Alan Kirshner emphasize that the rapture precedes God's wrath, while the second coming happens after it. Again, not separated by 7 years, but separated by whatever length of time the day of the Lord requires to run its course. So if I go back over to, for instance, this chart can work. We see that the Great Tribulation is here in the middle, and then the second coming is going to be over here. Jesus' reign in Jerusalem begins, right? This arrow pointing down here. So that means we have this gap here, right here, that is separating the coming of the Son of Man, meaning meaning this part, the rapture, is separated from this part, the second coming, by a time frame. How much time? We don't know exactly. Going back to the previous chart so you can follow along that way. Oops. There we go. Here, this time frame is this part, the day of the Lord. How long is the day of the Lord? We don't know, but all we know is that it separates these two time frames, the rapture from the second coming. They're separated. But notice it's not 7 years. It's not this type of separation like a pre-tribber would say, a completely 7-year separation, nor are the second coming and the rapture on the same time or on the same day like a classic post-tribber would say. So we still do have a separation between the two, the rapture and the second coming. They're separated by a time frame, but they're only separate. So on one hand, they're separated by that time frame, but on the other hand, they're all joined together as one event known as the day of the Lord, God's wrath, the parousia, i.e., that's why I kept going back to, I've got to find a more efficient way I think I need to put these two slides closer to each other so I don't have to scroll through them like I could do. That's why I put them together right here. This is one event known as the Day of the Lord. So going back to my slide, in fact, let me see what I'm doing by way of time. Is that right? Yeah, I got 10 minutes left. Pre-wrath proponents say that the rapture and the second coming are connected by the parousia. They are one and the same parousia. This causes a little bit of ambiguity on the part of those who don't know that that's what we mean when we say they're the same event. We're not saying like post-tribbers that they're the same event on top of one another. We're saying that they're the same event known as the parousia. But chronologically, the rapture precedes God's wrath, while the second coming happens after it. The two events are part of one larger return of Christ, but serve different purposes. The rapture delivers the church from wrath, and the second coming brings judgment to the world and establishes Christ's reign. And this is the pre-wrath model that we're talking about. I'm trying to make a case for this particular version. So pay attention, don't get confused. What are my conclusions to this particular study? I'm going to finish this tonight, and we'll be turning next week into a different topic. We're still in making a case for the pre-wrath, and I'm going to probably bring in one last resource. I haven't decided if I really want to do it yet, but I'm mulling it over. I want to now kind of bounce off of the post-trib in a more heated fashion, now that I've tried to make my heavy impassioned plea for the pre-wrath model, I want to show you where the pre-wrath and the post-trib are kind of unique from each other. Even though they're very similar, I want to show you similarities and differences. In conclusion for tonight, however, we're done in 10 minutes. Properly distinguishing between tribulation and wrath, as well as between the rapture and second coming, is crucial for a clear understanding of eschatology and the prophetic timeline in Scripture. I think it doesn't do us any good to conflate terminology and to leave terminology ambiguous. I know we're not doing it on purpose, but it happens nevertheless. It's a kind of an unfortunate occurrence that happens when teachers aren't perhaps maybe doing a better job of trying to make sure that the people that they're teaching know for sure the way they understand the terms as differentiated against other people who have similar terminology but are using them in differing ways. And so I believe, again, it's the teacher's responsibility, which is what I'm trying to do right now, do my part to disambiguate the terminology that we pre-wrathers use. Even if in the end you disagree with me, I'm fine with that. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that our position is airtight. I'm not imagining that. It would be nice, right? If I was so arrogant, I could say that. Yeah, our position's airtight. It's flawless. You just need to jump on board because we've got the right position. No, we're not saying that. We pre-wrathers aren't so arrogant to say that our position is flawless. In fact, in topic 12, I'm going to actually show you some of the weaknesses of the pre-wrath position. Yeah, there are weaknesses, and I'm not ashamed to show them. But the point I'm trying to make is that even though our position might not be perfect, we still have a responsibility as Bible students to do our best to make sure that the people that we're teaching and that we're explaining our position to, we have a job, a responsibility to do our best to make sure that they understand the way we're using the terminology, in distinction to other teachers who are speaking on the same topic but having a differing interpretation of the same terms. All right, hope it didn't confuse you with that one. In my conclusion, I go on to say the tribulation refers to a time of, this is conclusion summary, the tribulation in a pre-wrath model refers to a time of intense persecution and suffering for believers under the reign of the Antichrist, marked by Satan's wrath against the people of God. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The tribulation is Satan's wrath against God's people. By comparison, the day of the Lord is God's wrath against Satan's people and Satan's kingdom. The tribulation is Satan attacking God and Christians, and the day of the Lord is God attacking Satan and unbelievers. So that's another way for me to help distinguish between the purposes and some of the earmarks of the two differing positions. So tribulation, don't get confused. It is a time where Satan primarily is going to be taking care of his own. He's not going to persecute his own kingdom. He's not going to go out and behead all of those who are taking the mark. That doesn't make any sense. He's going to, for the most part, be extending peace and safety, although it's false, but it will be perceived to be genuine by those who take the mark. I mean, why else would you take the mark if it's not for some perception of protection and provision from the God of this world at that time? Satan will be recognized as the God of this world. The people will be worshiping him. They will be taking his mark and worshiping his image, and thus they will be enjoying a measure of protection. But it will be false protection, because from God's perspective, it's all going to come crashing down. That's why Paul said they will be crying peace and safety, and then sudden destruction will befall them. Right? So tribulation refers to a time of intense persecution for us. It's our tribulation. It's not tribulation for the world per se. It's tribulation for Jews and Christians, suffering for believers under the reign of the Antichrist. I should say suffering for the elect, because Israel is still God's elect. Even though they're not believers in Jesus, they still suffer under Antichrist persecution because he hates God's people. So it's marked by Satan's wrath against the people of God. It's a time when the church is tested and believers endure hardship for their faith. We must go through it. We must go through it. In contrast, the wrath refers specifically to the day of the Lord, a period when God's righteous judgment is poured out upon an unbelieving world, punishing those who have rejected him. It's also a time when judgment is poured out on Satan's kingdom. The tribulation is allowed by God but initiated by evil forces, while the wrath is divine in origin, signaling the end of human rebellion. I have to make a clarification here because I know I'm going to get some pushback on this one. I know what the pre-tribbers are going to say. They're going to say, no, Ariel, if you read through the book of Revelation starting in chapter 5 and working your way towards chapter 6, you're going to see that the 7 seals are broken by Yeshua exclusively. Therefore, since Yeshua's wrath and the Father's wrath are the same wrath, right, the very end of Revelation chapter 6, it mentions that the wrath of the wrath of the Lamb and the wrath of God are the same wrath. And since Yeshua the Lamb initiates this time by cracking open the seals, the pre-tribbers are going to push back and say that the tribulation is not Satan's doing, it's Jesus himself, because Jesus is the one that opens the seals, and he's the only one worthy to open the seals. And to that, I'm going to respond partially true. Jesus is the one who's only able to open the seals. This is true. He's the only one in heaven worthy to open the seals, and he himself does open the seals. And yet, there are still enough details for us to differentiate between what is the wrath of God and yet what is God's allowing of Satan to persecute his elect. So I'm going to double down on that and say that it's still the tribulation is allowed by God, even though it is, and it's initiated by evil forces, but it's still within God's control. God is controlling the entire event, obviously, because God's in control. He never loses control, so don't get me wrong there. Yes, Jesus initiates those seals. He opens them, right? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse go forth from there. So hope you're not misunderstanding. The tribulation is allowed by God, but it's initiated by evil forces. Initiated there, don't misunderstand what I mean by that. It's not that I'm trying to contradict the fact that Jesus initiates the seals. Like I said, I'm anticipating pushback on this as a pre-wrather. Rather, it's within the context when I say initiated by evil forces. God is allowing Satan to initiate the tribulation and to set himself up in the temple and to erect the image and to impose the mark and things like that. God allows all that. The wrath, by comparison, is divine in origin through and through. It signals the end of the human rebellion. Satan doesn't cut short his own tribulation. If Satan had his way, the tribulation would run its course and wipe out every elected person first, and then probably he would turn on all of humanity. That's just my speculation. But he at least would try to wipe out every Jew and Christian if he had the chance and he had the time. But God interrupts that. That's why the wrath is divine in origin. Similarly, the rapture and the second coming are distinct events within the larger return of Christ. Like I keep mentioning, I'm just going to keep flashing back to this particular chart. Yeshua's parousia is one single coming, yet 2 significant events. The rapture on the front end of the day of the Lord, the second coming on the back end of the day of the Lord. But both events, rapture and second coming, are absolutely described in the Bible as one event known as the parousia. So it's one event with 2 events. I know you're thinking, Ariel, that doesn't make sense. One event with 2 events. Okay, depends on if you zoom out or zoom in, right? When you look at one map with 2 differing aspects, if you zoom out, they overlap. If you zoom in, they separate. If you look at 2 cities on a map that are close to each other, you zoom out, and the 2 cities kind of collapse on top of one another because of the, you're losing detail. You're zooming out, and so you're getting farther away from the 2 cities, and so an optical illusion is created by the 2 cities overlapping. But we know that when we zoom in and get closer to those 2 cities, we can start to see the distance between the 2. Same thing. Zoom out, one parousia, they look like the same event. Zoom in, you see the rapture and the second coming as differing events. Where do we get the zoom in feature? In the book of Revelation. in the book of Revelation. In Matthew's in the Olivet Discourses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a lot of zoom out going on. There seems to be more zoom out than we would hope for. But when we get to Revelation, we got a lot of zoom in. So that's kind of one way to work with the different events. Rapture and the second coming are distinct events within the larger return of Christ. The rapture happens before the outpouring of God's wrath and serves to rescue the church from the impending divine judgment. It is described as the gathering of believers, both living and resurrected, to meet Christ in the air, right? 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17, the classic rapture passage. On the other hand, the second coming of Christ's physical return to earth in power and glory, where he defeats the forces of evil and establishes the millennial kingdom. This is the second coming. It is distinct from rapture, not just in timing, but in purpose and in detail, and even in scriptural references. Revelation 19:11-16, like I just read earlier. Unlike the rapture, where Christ does not come all the way to the earth, in the second coming, like we just looked at in Revelation, he physically descends to bring final judgment and usher in his reign. We pre-wrathers, like many pre-millennial Bible students, which would include pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib, we believe that Christ will reign physically and bodily from planet Earth. And so the rapture doesn't have Christ touching down from Earth at that moment. He's in the clouds, he's coming on the clouds, and he rescues the church up to be with him in the air. And then where do they go from there? Well, briefly they go up into heaven. At least that's where I see them showing up in Revelation chapter 7. They show up in heaven. They get their white robes. We get our white robes. We get palm branches. We get harps. Yes, I think we do have harps. I think that shows up in Revelation as well. But a number of other things happen in heaven. I think perhaps maybe the marriage supper of the Lamb is up there. The Bema Seat judgment is up there. Some other events like that. And then eventually Christ does come back down to earth to defeat the Antichrist and the false prophet. They're both taken off the scene, and Christ ushers in his physical 1,000-year kingdom. At some point in time, then the church that was in heaven must come back to earth also to rule and reign with Christ. So do we come back with him on the white horses? Possibly, but not. I'm not going to say definitively just yet. In time, I'll deal with that passage, but for now, Jesus comes back and does battle with Antichrist. That is definitive. Whether or not we battle with him is speculative. By understanding these distinctions between rapture and second coming, believers can better comprehend the chronological order of end-time events as described in biblical prophecy. And guess what? That's the end of my slideshow there. That's the end of the presentation for the Disambiguating show, and that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events.